It would be fair to say a wiser king would never have stood in that corridor, but a wiser king would also have asked his wife, once in 3 years of marriage, what she carried behind her quiet. Varric of Greycairn had never asked. So the divorce he meant to hand her that morning was, if a man traced it honestly to its root, his own doing entirely. He had the writ folded in his coat when he came looking for her. It was a small thing to hold, a single page, with his own seal already pressed into the wax. And it weighed nothing, and it felt like a stone the size of the palace. A setting aside. A quiet dissolution of the Rimland marriage, dignified, bloodless, arranged so that no one need be shamed, and the alliance could be renegotiated on cleaner terms. His counsel had drawn it. His counsel had, in the gentle and patient way of a man who had raised him, explained why it was wise. Varric had agreed. He always agreed with Alden in the end. He told himself he was doing her a kindness. 3 years wed to a woman who never warmed to him, who met his rare civilities with the same flat courtesy she gave the door guards who sat at his left hand through every banquet, like a carving of a queen, rather than a queen, cold, watchful, unreadable. The court had a name for her that they thought he did not know. The Stone Bride. He had stopped resenting it. A man could not resent the weather. He had simply decided to stop standing out in it. What the court did not say, because the court had never troubled to look, was that the Stone Bride missed nothing. She knew which of his lords carried debts, and to whom they carried them. She knew the names of the kitchen boys, and which men of the night watch drank on their posts. She sat through the banquets like a carving and counted the room every time. Out of a habit her homeland had pressed into her before she could read. Varric had married a watchtower and spent 3 years calling it a wall. She was not in her rooms. A maid flustered, said the queen had gone to the East Gallery, where her mother was lodged, for the Lady Halla had ridden down from the Rimlands 3 days past and would ride home within the week. Varric went that way himself, which was already a strangeness, a king carrying his own bad news, and he came to the gallery door, which stood open a hand's width, and he heard his wife's voice, and he stopped, because he had never once in 3 years heard her use it like that. It was not cold, it was breaking. I have tried, mother, Runa was saying. You think I have not tried. I have counted every kindness I dared show him and made myself put it down again before he could see it and pity me. Do you know what it is to love a man who married you the way you would sign for a shipment of grain? To sit beside him and want him and know that if you reached for him, he would only be embarrassed for you? Varric did not breathe. Behind the door, there was the small sound of a chair, of a mother's hand. He could imagine it. On a daughter's hair. Then tell him, said the older voice, tired and low. Tell him what? Runa said. That the savage bride they laugh at loves him? He would think it a ploy. He has been taught to think everything I do is a ploy. And I will not hand a man like that the sight of my heart, so he can decide whether it is useful. Her voice dropped, and Varric had to lean toward the gap to catch it, and he hated himself for leaning, and he leaned. And there is worse than that, mother. There is the other thing. If he knew what I have done to keep him breathing under this roof, he would not thank me. He would want to know why this Stone Bride was creeping his own halls at night. He would ask what I was really after. He would never once believe the answer was only him. The older woman said something too soft to reach the door. 3 times, Runa answered her. 3 times this year, and he does not know of one of them, and he never will. Because the day he learns it is the day he learns how close it has already come. Let him keep his safe little belief that nothing in Greycairn would ever dare. It is the only gift I have that he will actually take. Her mother was quiet a while. You cannot stand between a man and the dark forever and call it nothing, Hala said. One night, the dark will be more than a single woman in a corridor can turn, and he will wake to find he owed his whole life to a wife he had already sent north. Then he will owe it, Runa said, and never know the debt, and that is how I want it. I did not do it to be paid. I did it because when I try to picture the world with him gone out of it, I cannot make the picture hold. Varek stood in the corridor, with a folded page in his coat that ended the marriage of a woman who had, it seemed, 3 times this year kept him alive, and never let him see her do it. He had come to give her the kindness of a clean end. He understood, standing there, that he had understood nothing at all, not her coldness, which was armor, not her silence, which was pride, laid over a wound he had put there himself, and not the small, damning riddle she had just dropped into the quiet, the one his mind had already closed its jaws around and would not release. 3 times this year, 3 times, someone had come close enough to end him. And his stone of a wife had known, and had moved in the dark, and had said nothing, so that he could sleep the stone bride. He had let them use the name in his own hall, and had never once put it down, and she had answered the insult by keeping the knife from his back, and letting him keep the comfort of never knowing the knife was there. He did not announce himself. He did not push the door. He turned very carefully, the way a man turns when the floor might be ice, and he walked back the way he had come with the writ, still folded over his heart, and by the time he reached his own study, his certainty about every single thing had come apart in his hands. A wiser king, again, would have simply gone back and knocked. Varek did not, and the reason he did not is the reason the whole miserable business took as long as it did to mend. He did not trust what he had heard, not because it rang false, because it rang true, and true was the one thing 3 years of careful counsel had trained him never to expect from her. He sat with the unlit lamp and turned it over. Every cold civility he could remember from her, held up now to a different light, showed a different face. The winter he had taken fever, she had not come to his sickbed, and he had marked it as indifference. He remembered, now, that the drafts that broke the fever had come from her still room unsigned. The night his hunting horse had come back lame and wild-eyed without him, and half the guard had gone out with torches, it had been the Queen, they said, who sent them to the West Ravine, and no one had ever asked how the Queen had known. He had not asked. He had been too busy being alive to wonder who had made certain of it. A groom had been turned out in the spring, and the household had called the Queen cold and high for it, and Varek had half agreed without thinking. He wondered now what the man had done, or seen, or carried into the stables, that a cold and high woman had nonetheless sent south with coin enough to keep a family through the winter, so long as the family went far and went quietly. He had built a whole marriage on the belief that the woman at his left hand felt nothing, and the belief had been comfortable, because a man who is loved by a wife he has neglected owes her something, and a man married to a stone owes her only politeness. He saw the shape of his own convenience now, and it was not a pleasant thing to look at. And yet, there is worse than that, she had said. If he knew what I have done. And a colder voice in Varek, one that did not sound like his own but that he had listened to for so many years, he could no longer tell them apart, said, "What has she done, exactly? Kept you alive, or kept you managed? A woman moving your own halls, at night, steering your guard, deciding what her king may and may not know for his own good. Her people play the long patient game. Boy, you were warned. You were warned by the one man who has never once steered you wrong." Alden had said that. Alden had said a version of that 100 times across the years, always kindly, always with a hand on the shoulder. The Rimlin bride is loyal to the Rimlins. Varek, love her if you must, but do not tell her your heart, for it will go north in a letter within the week. It had always sounded like care. It had always sounded like an old man guarding a young king from his own soft nature. Only now, turning it over in the dark, did Varek notice how neatly every one of those gentle warnings had done a single, quiet piece of work, which was to keep him and the woman at his left hand strangers to each other for 3 years running. He set the thought down fast, the way a man sets down something hot, and told himself he would not pick it up again. He would pick it up again. He simply did not know it yet. He almost went to Alden now. He stood, in fact, with his hand on the door, meaning to lay the whole strange morning before the man who had raised him, and let that steady mind sort the wheat from the chaff, the way it always had. And then, for no reason he could have named, he did not. Some instinct older than his counsel, some animal thing under the crown, kept his mouth shut about what he had heard in the gallery. He told himself he was only being careful. He did not yet know that it was the first honest choice he had made in 3 years. By the time the candles burned down, he had decided he would not sign the writ. Not because he was sure of her, but because he could not afford to be wrong in either direction. If she was what her confession claimed, a wife who loved him and had guarded him in silence, then he had nearly thrown a rare and loyal thing into the road. And if she was the other thing, a clever northern hand with her own game, then setting her aside blind was worse than useless. For he would send his enemy home to plot in comfort and never learn what she knew. So he would keep her close. He would be, at last, the husband he had never troubled to be, warm, attentive, present, and he would watch, and he would learn precisely what his queen had done in the dark, and why. He would earn the truth out of her the slow way, since he had squandered every fast way years ago. It was, he thought, a sound plan. He was rather proud of it. He did not yet grasp that he had just decided to court his own wife, under false colors, while carrying the secret of her stolen confession in his chest, and that a plan built on a lie to the one person who had never lied to him could end only one way. He looked out across the dark courtyard to the lit window that was hers, and he made himself a quiet promise that he would learn what she was, and then decide whether to keep her. He would come to wish, later, and often, that he had simply knocked. Runa knew the shape of a man who was about to be rid of her, and so when the king began to be kind, she did not soften, she sharpened. She had been braced for the writ for a month. She was Rimland. Her people did not pretend a wound was not coming, merely because it had not yet landed. She had watched the council Alden grow quiet and courteous around her, in the way men grow courteous around a thing already sold. And she had packed, in her own mind, the few belongings that were truly hers. And she had rehearsed the face she would wear, riding north in disgrace, so that not one soul in Greycairn would have the satisfaction of seeing it cost her anything. She had been ready to lose him. She had been ready for years. It was the one contest she knew she could win, the losing of him, because she had never once let herself believe she had him. And then, the morning after, her mother's last quiet talk with her, the writ did not come. What came instead was the king. He came to her door himself, which he had not done since the wedding night, and he had put aside whatever errand had darkened his face for weeks, and he asked, as though it were an ordinary thing between them, whether she would ride out with him to see the frost on the high pasture. Runa stood very still, and looked at him, and felt every alarm her homeland had ever taught her go off at once. "Your Grace is busy," she said. "You need not entertain me." "I find I am not busy," said Vadik. He smiled at her. It was a good smile. She had always thought so, from a careful distance, the way one admires a blade one has no intention of touching. She distrusted it entirely. A man did not spend 3 years looking through his wife, and then, in a single night, decide to look at her. Unless he had seen something he wanted, or feared something he needed. She did not yet know which. She only knew that the stone bride had survived 3 years at this court by never once mistaking a change in the weather for a change in the man, and she was not about to start. Still, she went. One did not refuse a king in his own hall, and refusing him now when the whole court was already whispering that the setting aside had been called off, would only draw the eyes she had spent 3 years learning to slip. So she let him hand her up onto the grey mare, and she rode beside him into a cold, bright morning, and she kept her hands easy on the reins, and her mind moving like a hunter's. Something had changed him. She meant to find out what before it changed her. He talked, on the ride, more than he had talked to her in a year. Small things, the frost, the state of the North Road, a jest about his own counsel that was, she noted with irritation, actually rather funny. She gave him back the flat courtesy she always gave him. But once, cresting the ridge, her horse shied at a fox, and she put out a hand without thinking, and steadied his bridle before his own hand had moved. A soldier's reflex, quicker than a lady's ought to be, and she felt him go still and look at her, really look, and she cursed herself silently and drew her hand back as if the leather had burned it. "You have fast hands," Varric said mildly, "for a woman who is only decorative." "The court says, decorative," Runa answered, before she could stop the edge in it. "The court says, a great many things, your grace." "I have never known you to trouble yourself with which of them are true." She should not have said it. She watched it land, watched something move behind his pale eyes that she could not read, and she braced for the cold to come down again, the way it always did when she forgot herself and showed a corner of the blade. It did not come. He only kept looking at her with that new, unbearable attention, as though she were a page in a language he had just discovered he could read. And he said, quietly, "No, I have not troubled myself. That was badly done of me." And there it was. The thing she had spent 3 years making certain could never happen. A crack of warmth, sudden and specific, aimed straight at her, and her stone heart, the traitor, leaned toward it before she could nail it back into place. She felt the lean. She hated the lean. She turned her face to the frost so he would not see it. He wanted something. Men like Varric of Greycairn did not turn kind by accident, and they did not turn kind for nothing. And she would ride at his side, and smile her flat smile, and let him think the stone bride was thawing, and all the while, she would watch him, the way she watched the dark halls at night, until she understood exactly what her husband was hunting. She was so busy resolving to uncover his secret that it did not once occur to her he had already taken hers. The trouble with courting a woman, in order to interrogate her, is that the courting does not know it is a ruse. It goes about its work regardless. Varric learned this over the following days, without ever quite admitting he was learning it. He had told himself a clean plan. Be present, be warm, watch her come apart into whatever she truly was, and he set about being present with the grim discipline of a man laying a siege. He took his midday meal with her, instead of with his council. He walked the queen's garden at her shoulder. He asked her questions, careful ones, questions with soft edges, that a woman with something to hide might snag herself upon. And he waited for the snag. It did not come, and the not coming undid him more than any confession could have. Because Runa, cornered by kindness, did not soften into a liar. She grew precise. When he asked an idle question about the North Road, she gave him back the true state of the North Road, the washed bridge at Harl's Ford, the toll the Ford master skimmed, the 2 villages that would go hungry by spring if the grain writ was not reissued before the passes closed. When he asked lightly who among his lords she would not turn her back on, she told him flatly 3 names and the reasons, and every reason was correct, and one of them he had trusted since boyhood. "You keep a great deal in your head," he said. On the 3rd day, in the armory yard, where she had come to watch the young guard drill, and he had followed her because following her had stopped feeling like a plan and started feeling like the only sensible place to be. "A woman married into a strange court keeps a great deal in her head," Runa said. "Or she does not keep her head very long. Your grace never had to learn it. You were born standing in the middle of the room. I was set down at the edge and told to be grateful for the view." He looked at her. He was doing that more and more, looking at her as though 3 years of not looking had built up a debt his eyes meant to collect all at once. "And what do you see?" he asked from the edge. "Everything," she said. "That is rather the point of the edge." She said it without pride, the way another person might state the color of a wall. And Varric felt the ground shift. Under a belief he had held so long, he had mistaken it for the floor. He had thought her cold because she gave him nothing. He saw now that she gave him nothing because he had never once made himself a safe place to set a true thing down. The coldness had never been her nature. It had been her verdict on him. And the worst of it, the thing that sat in his chest like a swallowed coal, was that the verdict had been just. "Show me," he heard himself say. Runa turned. "Show you what?" "The North Road, Harl's Ford, the grain writ. All of it. The thing you carry that no one asked you to carry." He had meant it to sound like strategy, a door opening onto her secrets. It came out sounding like a man asking to be taught. "You say you see everything, from the edge. I have spent my reign in the middle of the room, seeing nothing. Come and stand me at the edge. Show me what my own house looks like, from where you have been made to live." For a long moment she only studied him, and he understood he was being weighed, and weighed by an expert, and that the scale had been calibrated over 3 hard years and would not be flattered into a wrong answer. "You will not like it," she said at last. "I have not liked much of what I have learned this week," said Varric. "I find it agrees with me better than the things I liked did." Something moved at the corner of her mouth, gone before it could become anything, but he saw it and it went through him, like the first warmth after a cold ride. So she showed him. And it was not the tour he had imagined, a wife displaying her cleverness for a husband's applause. It was an inspection, brisk and merciless, of a kingdom he had been signing his name across for years without once reading it. She took him to the storerooms and showed him the tallies that did not match the deliveries. She took him to the counting hall and laid a finger on a column of numbers and said, "This is where the grain money goes to die, and here, and here." And follow it up the chain and it always dies in the same 3 offices. And Varric looked at the 3 offices and felt the coal in his chest go cold, because he knew the man those 3 offices answered to, and had known him all his life, and would have sworn on his crown that the man was the last honest soul in Grey Cairn. He said nothing. He had learned, this week, the uses of saying nothing from a woman who had made an art of it. But he marked the offices. He marked the road the money took. And for the first time it occurred to him to wonder whether his wife's secret and his own danger were not 2 separate riddles at all, but one riddle he had been too comfortable to solve. "You have gone quiet," Runa observed, closing the ledger. "I am learning," said Varric. "You told me I would not like it. And do you?" "No," he said. "Show me the rest." She should have gone straight to her rooms after the counting hall. Instead, because the king asked, she walked him back across the outer ward, in the blue, last of the light, and that decision very nearly cost him his life, which was, she would think later, a grimly fitting way for the evening to prove her point. She felt it before she saw it. That was the Rimland in her, the sense her people were born with, and her court-trained husband had lost across 100 safe generations, the small wrongness in a familiar dark. The ward at this hour should have held 2 sounds, the far-off clatter of the kitchens and the slow scrape of the gate watch, pacing. It held a third. A stillness in the wrong place, over by the buttress where the shadow pooled thick, a stillness that was holding its breath. "Keep walking," she said, low and pleasant, as though remarking on the weather. "Do not look. Laugh, if you can manage it." Varric, to his lasting credit, laughed. It was not a good laugh, but it was a laugh, and it bought them 3 more steps. "Is this the part," he murmured through it, "where you tell me I am in danger and to stand behind you?" "This is the part," Runa agreed, "where you do exactly that, and we discuss your objections afterward." The bolt came out of the dark on the word afterward. She had already moved. She took his coat in one fist and turned him with her whole weight, and the quarrel that had been flying for the back of his skull went, instead, through the meat of the air where he had been and cracked into the buttress stone. Then there were 3 of them out of the shadow, quick and quiet and hooded, and no drill in the armory yard had ever moved like this, because armory drills were for soldiers, and these were for killers, and Runa stopped being a queen. She had no blade of her own, never once permitted one in Grey Cairn, so she made do with what a Rimland girl learns before her letters. She turned the first man's knife arm aside, put him down with his own weight, and took his knife on the way. The second she sent hard into the wall. The third was faster, and he was not going for her at all but past her, for the king and Runa did the only thing left, which was to be in the way. And the blade, she was a breath too slow to turn, caught her forearm instead of her husband's throat. It burned. She barely noticed. She had the wrist by then, and Rimland girls are taught exactly how a wrist comes apart. A whistle sounded from the dark, high and clean, and the two still standing melted back the way they had come, not fleeing, but withdrawing, and that detail turned her blood to winter. Because men who flee are a mob, and men who withdraw are an army, and armies have paymasters. Then the ward was still again, and she was crouched over a dropped knife, with her arm gone numb and singing, and her husband was looking at her. He was not looking at her the way a man looks at a wife who has just killed for him. He was looking at her the way a man looks at the answer to a question he has been afraid to ask. He was not. She noted through the ringing in her ears, remotely surprised. "You knew," she said. She got to her feet. "You are not shocked, Your Grace. You are relieved. You knew someone wanted you dead, and you let me walk you across a dark yard anyway." The pieces were falling now, fast and cold. The careful questions, the sudden warmth. The tour he had asked for, steering always, she saw it now. Toward the money, and the men, and the danger. This is what the kindness was for. You suspected the plots were real, and you wanted your one loyal blade close enough to catch them. "You have been courting a bodyguard, Runa," he said, and there was something raw in it, something that did not fit the tidy accusation she had built. "Do not." Her arm was on fire, and her heart was worse. "Just tell me one true thing. How long have you known your own house wants you in the ground?" For half a breath, she saw it cross his face, the whole truth, teetering. 3 times this year, he might have said, and she would have known in an instant that he had stood outside a gallery door. He did not say it. "Let me see your arm," he said instead, gently, and reached for her, and she stepped back out of his hands, and the space between them filled up with all the things neither of them would say. Across the weeks that followed, Runa waged a quiet war against her own good sense, and lost it by inches. The sensible course was plain. A man was keeping secrets from her, dangerous ones, and had all but admitted he was keeping her close for the use of her, rather than the truth of her. She knew what to do with such a man. She had known since she was a girl at the edge of the room. You watched him. You learned him. You kept your own heart bolted and your own knife sharp, and you never ever let the wanting of a thing persuade you that the thing was safe. She watched him. That part went to plan. The difficulty was that the more closely she watched Varric of Grey Cairn, the more she found she was simply watching Varric of Grey Cairn, which is a different and far more dangerous activity. He did not go back to the middle of the room. That was the thing she had not braced for. She had expected the warmth to have been a tool, and tools get set down once they have pried the door. Instead, he took the ruin she had shown him in the counting hall, and he went to work on it, quietly, doggedly, at her side. And he was not clever about it. The way she was clever, he was something rarer. He was willing to be wrong out loud in front of her and correct himself, and try again. He reissued the grain writ. He rode to Harl's Ford himself, and put the Ford master off his skim in a single cold sentence. He asked her each evening what she had seen that day from the edge, and he listened to the answer as though the answer were coin, and he stopped sleeping easy. She noticed that too. A man who had spent his life certain nothing in his house would dare touch him had stopped being certain, and it aged him, and it gentled him. And Runa, who had loved the certain untouchable version from a bitter distance for 3 years, found the newly mortal one nearly impossible to bear. He brought her things. That was the worst of it. The small, graceless offerings of a man who had never learned to give. and was learning it late and badly. A better knife, a real one, Rimland forged, left on her table without a word, which meant he had sent north for it, which meant he had thought of her wanting one and been ashamed on her behalf that she had none. A window in the south tower, unshuttered and swept, because she had said once, months ago, back when she still gave him nothing, that she missed being able to see weather coming. He remembered. He had been listening, even when she gave him nothing to hear. She held out. She was Rimland. Holding out was the one thing she did better than anyone at this soft court. But she lay awake in the dark now, with her mended arm aching, and her guard aching worse, and her traitor mind went to him without her leave, to the raw thing in his voice, in the ward, to the way he looked at her lately, as though the looking were a debt he could not pay fast enough. Being able to remember exactly why the door of her heart had to stay bolted, only that it did, only that unbolting it had ended her once before, in ways she had told no living soul but her mother. It came to a head as these things do, over nothing. A cold night, the south tower window, the two of them standing at it because he had found her there and had not left. He had brought the cocoa himself, which a king ought not to do, and their hands touched at the handing of the cup, and neither of them let go quite fast enough. "You are still angry with me," Varric said. He did not phrase it as a hope. He said it like a man reading weather off a sky he had finally learned to read. "I am still cautious with you," Runa said. "It is not the same thing, though I grant you they wear the same coat. Tell me the difference." Anger wants an apology. She looked out at the dark hills because looking at him had become unsafe. Caution wants the truth. "You have offered me a great deal this month. Your grace, a knife, a window. Your undivided and frankly alarming attention. You have not offered me the one thing I asked for in the ward, which is the shape of what is trying to kill you. So I keep my window open and my knife close, and my heart, if you will forgive the plainness, exactly where it is." He was quiet a long moment. When he spoke his voice had gone low and careful, and she knew, before he finished, that he was going to hand her a piece of it at last, and that it would not be the whole, and that she would take it anyway because she was so very tired of standing at the edge alone. "There is a hand behind it," he said. "Someone in this house, someone the money answers to, someone I have loved and trusted my whole life. I do not yet have the proof to move, and if I move without it, I will have a war in my own halls by morning. So I am gathering it, quietly, one thread at a time. And I am telling you this much, Runa, and only this much, because you put your body between me and a blade and asked me for one true thing, and I gave you nothing, and I have not been able to live with the nothing since." It was not the whole truth. She could feel the withheld part of it standing in the room like a fourth person. But it was true as far as it went, and it had cost him, and it was aimed at her, and her bolted heart slid its bolt back one notch without asking her permission at all. "That," she said, softly, "is a start." And she let him keep standing there at her open window in the cold, far longer than caution allowed, and she told herself she would re-bolt the door in the morning, and she very nearly believed it. We will pause here for just a moment. If you would like more stories like this one, please take a second to subscribe to the channel so the next one finds you. The trouble with a woman who has decided to stop guarding her heart is that she tends to choose the worst possible night to do it. The occasion was the harvest court, the one great gathering Greycairn held every year before the snows shut the passes, when every lord who mattered and a good many who only thought they did came down out of their halls to eat the king's food and take the measure of his year. Runa had spent 3 of these at the edge of the room, in her fashion, reading the hall the way she read everything, tallying the debts and the grudges and the lords who reached too often for the wine. Watching, always watching, and never yet seated among them. Now she was seated, and for the first time in 3 years, she attended not as a carving set at the king's left hand, but as something the whole hall could not quite put a name to. Varric had asked her, in plain words and where others could hear, to sit beside him as his wife and not as his sentence. She had put on the deep green her mother had carried down from the Rimlands, the color of the high pine country no one at this court had ever bothered to picture as her home, and when she came into the light of the great hall he looked up and found her, and looked at her the way a man looks at weather he has waited the whole of his life to see finally break. And Runa, who had built armor against every species of cruelty this court could invent, discovered she owned no armor at all against the one thing it had never tried on her, which was being wanted, openly, in a lit room, where anyone might see. He drew her out onto the gallery above the hall. When the music grew close, where the cold came clean off the dark and the roar of the court thinned to a murmur below them. "You cannot stand this," she said, studying him. She had learned his weathers by now, and tonight the ease he wore was a coat 2 sizes too small. "I have not been able to stand it since I was a boy," Varric admitted, and the admission seemed to cost him something. The smiling, the being whatever the room requires, so that no one troubles to look past it. "Alden taught me the trick before I had my growth. Wear the face, and no one bothers to count the man beneath. I have worn it so long that on the bad nights I forget there is a man beneath to be counted at all." "There is," Runa said, before her caution could get a hand to her mouth. "I have counted him. I prefer him, by a wide margin, to the face." Something gave way in him at that quietly, the way river ice gives at the first real thaw. He turned to her fully, and the practiced grace was simply gone, and what stood in its place was young and stripped bare, and hers, and he lifted a hand to her jaw as though he half feared she would prove a trick of the light. The cold gallery, and the din below, and 3 barren years, all thinned to nothing, and what remained was only the plain, unmanageable fact of a man wanting her, and for once, letting it show. The kiss, when it came, belonged to neither of them, and to both. And in the meeting of it she felt something rush through her that she had no name for and had never once felt in her life. A flood of warmth and dread, and a fierce guarding tenderness that was. She understood with a lurch, not entirely hers to feel. It was his. It poured into her clear and strange and unasked, the ache under his ribs and the fear beneath the ache. And she broke off with a sharp breath, shaken to her heels. "You felt that," he said, unsteady. His eyes had gone dark and astonished. Her pulse was a drum. It was too much and too fast. 3 years of drought, and now a wall of water, and the old wary animal. In her, the one that had learned love, was a gift handed over only so it could be taken back, threw its whole weight against the door she had just cracked open. "It was nothing," she made herself say. "A kiss." Varric went very still. "Nothing," he echoed softly. And she watched the bare thing in his face gather itself and retreat behind the practiced mask, watched him reach for the very trick he had confessed a breath ago that he loathed, and she despised herself for being the one who had put his hand back on it. A servant stepped onto the gallery. Then, bearing a tray with 2 cups of wine, as dark as the sky beyond the arches, "Your Grace," he murmured, and held it out. Varric reached for the near cup, wounded and half absent, and every border-bred nerve Runa owned snapped awake at once. She did not choose to move. Her hand was simply there, striking the cup from his fingers, so that it burst apart on the flagstones, her other hand vising shut on his wrist. "Leave it," she breathed. "There is something in it, beneath the fruit and the oak. That green bitterness. Do you catch it?" She saw him draw the air in, saw him find the wrongness under the wine. "That was not brewed to sting a man awake," she said. "That was brewed to lay him down and see he never rose." All the color went out of his face. The servant was already gone, melted into the crowd, and Runa understood with a cold that went to her bones that whoever had sent the cup had known exactly which hand would carry it, and exactly which night his queen would be too busy being kissed to watch the room. "Not a word," Varric said, and his voice had gone flat and precise, the ruling voice. "Not to the watch." Not to your handmaid, not to anyone, and above all not tonight. There are 3 Rimland lords sleeping under this roof, who will read a poisoning as weakness in the crown, or as a plot against your own people, and either way, they will be riding for the border to arm before the frost lifts. Give me until morning. I am close. I have very nearly got him by the throat and one wrong breath tonight, and he slips the noose, and I begin again from nothing. Him, she said, and did not let his eyes go. And still, you will not give me his name. By morning you will have it, he said. You will have every last thread of it. I swear that to you on whatever you will still let me swear on. He pressed his brow to hers, quick and undone. Only wait for me. One night. Trust me, one night. Every instinct. 3 hard years had sharpened in her, stood up and said no. But she looked at the wine bleeding dark across the flagstones, and at the man who had come within a swallow of dying of a kiss she had begun, and she made herself say it one night. So she let him go back down into the warm roar and the practiced smiling, and she stood at the gallery rail and gave him a slow count of 30. And then, because she was Rimland to the bone, and her people had never yet learned the trick of waiting meekly in a corridor, while the ones they loved walked off into the dark alone, she gathered her green skirts in one fist and went down after him. She lost him at the foot of the west stair, where the torches gave out and the old part of the keep began, and she found him again by the one thing she could never have braced for, the sound of her own name spoken behind a half-shut door in the wrong voice entirely. Not Varick's voice, Alden's. She stopped, with one hand flat against the cold stone, and made herself breathe and listen, the way she had taught herself to listen at doors across 3 years of guarding a man who did not know he was guarded, and the careful new world she had spent a month letting herself build. She is Rimland to the bone, my boy, Alden was saying, warm and patient and terrible. I have told you for 3 years. The border plays a long game, and you have gone and handed the long game your open throat. Sign the writ. Send her north. It is not too late to be rid of her before she is rid of you. And Varick's voice, low even, giving nothing. You drew that writ awfully fast, Alden, almost as if it had been waiting in a drawer. A pause. When Alden spoke again, the warmth had thinned. Just slightly, just enough. I do not care for your tone, and I have stopped caring for your counsel, said Varick. I have been reading the grain tallies. I have been to the 3 offices where the money dies. I know whose hand it dies in. I have known for a fortnight. I only wanted to see whether you would say the words to my face. Runa pushed the door. They both turned. Varick behind the desk, a sheaf of papers in his fist. Alden across from him, the kind old face she had distrusted for 3 years and never once let herself be right about. And behind Alden's eyes, for just a heartbeat, before he smoothed it away, something that was not kindness at all. Ah, Alden said, recovering, spreading his hands. The Queen, of course. Listening at doors. As I said, my boy, Rimland to the bone. But Runa was not looking at Alden. She was looking at her husband, and at the papers in his hand, and at the desk, and the pieces were already falling, cold and fast and merciless, the way they always fell for her, too late to be any comfort. You have known for a fortnight, she said to Varick, whose hand it dies in, who is trying to kill you. You have known for a fortnight, and tonight at the window you told me you had no name, no proof, that you needed one more night. Her voice did not shake, which was somehow worse. You lied to me at the window. You looked at me and you lied. Runa. He came around the desk. She stepped back and he stopped. I could not tell you here, in this house, with him at large in it. If your face had changed once at his table, he would have known I knew, and I would have lost him and possibly you. That is a reason, she said. It is even a good one. It is not the reason, because the older, deeper cold had reached her now, the one that had nothing to do with tonight. You have been strange with me since the morning. The writ did not come. warm out of nowhere, present. Asking, always asking, about the danger, about what I carry, about my nights. She watched his face, and she saw it. The flinch, the thing he had been carrying. You did not fall for me, your grace. You found me useful. Something told you the stone bride was worth keeping close, and you kept me close. And you let me believe it was the man wanting the woman, when it was the king wanting the blade. What told you? What changed that morning? And Varric, who had a fast answer for everything, said nothing. He said nothing for so long that she had her answer in the silence. And then he made it worse by speaking. I heard you, he said quietly. The morning I came to give you the writ, the gallery door was open. I heard you tell your mother that you loved me, and that you had made yourself cold so I would never see it and pity you, and that you had turned back 3 attempts on my life, and would rather die than let me know it was you. He said it gently, and every gentle word landed like a blow. I did not court a blade, Runa. I heard a woman I had wronged for 3 years lay her whole heart on a table where she thought I would never find it, and I could not sign the writ, and I could not tell you I had heard, because how does a man say that? So I did the coward's thing. I came close and said nothing, and let you find your own way back to me, and told myself that was kindness too. The gallery, the confession. The one thing in all the world she had spoken aloud, to exactly one living soul, because she believed it safe. He had been standing on the other side of the door. Every warm moment since, the knife, the window, the cocoa, the kiss, all of it built on the fact that he had already held her most naked truth in his hands, and let her hand it to him a second time, without ever admitting he had it. That was mine, she whispered. In 3 years at this court, I let exactly one thing out of my own keeping, and I put it into my mother's hands in a room I believed empty, because it was the single thing I owned that no one here could touch. And you were standing at the door. I was standing at the door. You let me confess to you twice, she said, and her voice frayed at last. Once to my mother, where you had no right to be, and once with your own hands on me at that window, and you took it both times, and only the second time did I hand it to you willingly, and you knew that you were taking the same thing twice. He had no answer to that. There was no answer to be had. She looked at him a moment longer, this man she had bled for and unbolted for, and been a fool for, and she let him see all of it and none of it, and then she turned for the door on legs that did not feel like her own. Behind her, Alden's voice came soft and grave and brimming with sorrow, and she was too hollowed out in that instant to hear the fresh trap yawning open beneath her feet. Poor child, said Alden, to be used so. Come away from him. Let an old man who has your interest at heart tell you what your husband has truly been doing in the dark. He caught her in the corridor, the kind old man she had been right about all along. And he was so very gentle, and that gentleness was the finest weapon in the whole affair. I warned him, Alden said, walking her away from the door, a fatherly hand at her shoulder. I told him the Rimland alliance was rotten from the root. And do you know what he did with the poison in his cup tonight? He blamed your people. He means to name the border lords for it before the harvest court scatters. Name them and break the alliance and set you aside after all, with a murder on your family's name to seal it. I have the order drawn. I have seen it. Come, child. There are houses in this realm that would steady the throne when he falls and treat a wronged Rimland queen far better than he ever did. It was very good. Runa had to grant him that distantly, the way one grants a blade its edge while it is sliding between the ribs. It was aimed with a craftsman's precision at the exact wound Varric had opened not 10 minutes past, and, on a lesser night, with a lesser hurt, she would have swallowed it whole and thanked him for the cup. He kept talking as he walked her, and every word was a small weight laid on the scale, He recalled gently how the king had looked through her for 3 years. He wondered aloud, so kindly, whether a man who could pocket a woman's confession could be trusted with anything at all. He named the great houses who would rise to steady a shaken realm, and let her hear without once saying it that a wronged Rimland queen might sit far more comfortably beside one of them than she ever had beside Varek of Grey Cairn. He was, Runa thought, a truly gifted liar. She had lived beside a gifted liar's handiwork for 3 years, and mistaken it for her own certainty, and the taste of that was bitter enough to clear her head. Because she was Rimland, and her people had a hard rule about grief, which was that you never once let it do your counting for you. And even gutted, even shaking, Runa could count. Alden said Varek meant to name her people for the poison. Yet she had knocked the cup from Varek's own hand not 1 hour past, and Varek had begged her to say nothing, to name no one, to give him one quiet night. A man laying a murder at the border lord's feet does not silence the only witness who could sell it for him. The story did not fit the evening, which meant the story was a lie. Which meant the gentle old man, walking her so kindly away from her husband, was the hand the grain money died in, the paymaster of the army that withdrew, the third attempt and the second and the first. So Runa did the hardest thing her training had ever asked of her. She let her face crumple, she let the tears come, real ones, there was no shortage. "Take me to my father," she said, broken. "The High Chief is still under this roof. If Varek means to shame my house, my father must hear it from me before the court does." Alden's eyes gleamed. It was precisely what he wanted. The wronged queen carrying the accusation to the visiting Rimland chief, in her own tear-streaked voice, war lit with a single match, and his own hands clean. "Of course, child," he said. "Of course. Let me bring you to him." Her father's chamber was full when they came. Osmond of the Rimlands, grey and enormous and grim, and Varek, who had gotten there first, and whose face, when he saw her walk in on Alden's arm, went white and then perfectly carefully blank. Alden bowed to the chief with 3 decades of practiced grace. "High Chief," he said, "your daughter has something she must tell you, before the king does. It grieves me to be the one to bring her to it." Every eye went to Runa. Her father's, hard and waiting, Varek's, braced for the blade, certain she had come to bury him and unable, she saw, to even blame her for it. And Alden's, sure of her, already counting the war he had bought. She held her husband's eyes for one long moment, and into that silence she put everything she could not say aloud in this room, that she was sorry, that she should have believed him behind the desk, that she had come, not to bury him, but to stand at his shoulder. She watched him fail to understand it, watched him brace for the killing word. Then she turned to her father, dried her face with the back of her hand, and let every soft thing go out of it. "Father," she said, and her voice did not break at all now. "This man beside me drew a writ to divorce me before dawn, and has spent 3 years poisoning my marriage with lies. And tonight he put nightshade in the king's wine, and means to hang it on our house to break the alliance and set a puppet on this throne. I knocked the cup from Varek's hand myself, 1 hour ago, before witnesses. Ask him how he knew to blame the Rimlands for a poisoning that failed, when only the poisoner and I knew it had happened at all." The room went silent as a drawn breath. "This is hysteria," Alden said, but the warmth had gone out of him all at once, and everyone in the room heard it go. "The girl is distraught. She was used by her husband, and now she flails." "Then a search of your rooms costs you nothing," said Osmond of the Rimlands, in a voice like a rock fall, and nodded to his own men, and Alden's kind old face finally came off. He lunged for Runa. Naturally he did. She was the proof of it, standing and breathing and speaking, and a blade came out of his sleeve quicker than any grey old counselor had a right to move. But of everything this ruinous night had asked of her, this was the one task her body knew without being told. She stepped inside the reach of the knife, the way the border teaches its daughters before it teaches them their letters, caught the arm, rolled his own weight against him, and set the paymaster of 3 murders face down on the chief's floor with her knee planted between his shoulders and his knife spinning away across the stone. She bent low, over him, close enough that only he would hear. "For 3 years you sat across a hall from me and saw an ornament," she said. "You ought to have troubled yourself to look nearer." Then her father's warriors closed over him and took him up off the floor and out through the door, and the thing was finished. Osmond of the Rimlands went first to the matter of the poison and the proof, and the men to be roused as a chief must, but he paused on his way and set one enormous hand for a moment on his daughter's dark head, which from Osmond was a speech an hour long, and Runa had to look hard at the middle distance until her eyes cleared. And Varric stood among the wreck of the evening, and looked at her as though he had never in the whole of his life laid eyes on anything remotely like her. Which, to be fair to the man, he had not. She had walked into that room on the traitor's arm, wearing the face of the wronged wife come to burn her husband down, and she had turned the whole thing inside out with nothing but her wits and her word and her hands, and saved the very man who had lied to her at a window an hour before. He opened his mouth. She could see the thanks rising in him, and behind the thanks the hope. She did not let either of them land. "I did not do it for you," she said before the thanks could get out of him. "I did it because he was a traitor, and I am the sworn blade of this house, whatever this house has ever decided I was worth. Do not confuse the one thing for the other." And she walked out past him into the corridor, and he let her go, because he had finally learned that there are doors a man does not push, no matter how badly his whole heart is leaning on them. What followed was the strangest season of her life. Alden went to a cold cell beneath the old keep, and the rot he had worked into Greycairn for 30 years came out of it thread by thread, and Varric did the pulling, publicly, unflinchingly, until the court that had smirked at the stone bride began, grudgingly, to understand what its king had nearly thrown away. He made her more than a queen at his side. He made her the hand that held the guard, gave her the blade and the rank and the open right to walk his halls at night that she had taken in secret for 3 years. The border lords went home unbroken. The alliance held. By every measure that a kingdom keeps, it was a triumph. And Varric spent all of it trying to win his wife back and getting nowhere, and deserving every inch of the nowhere. He did not send her jewels. He knew her that well by now. He sent her the true things instead, and each one was an apology cut to her exact measure. He gave her father the winter road through the high passes that the Rimlands had needed for a generation, and no crown had troubled to build. He struck the words, "Stone Bride," from the court rolls with his own pen, quietly, and let no tongue use them again within his hearing, and the once or twice a careless lord forgot, the king's silence afterward taught the whole table not to. Nerys had opinions, as Nerys always did. In the first raw weeks, she was fierce on Runa's behalf. "Let him freeze," she said, folding linens with unnecessary violence. 40 flowers and a road do not buy back 3 years. But by the 2nd month, the wind in her had shifted, the way it shifts in a person who has to watch 2 miserable people be miserable in the same house. "He balanced the grain tallies to the coin," she said one evening, not looking up. "And he has written you how many letters now?" Runa did not answer, which was its own kind of answer, and Nerys, wisely, let it lie. He wrote to her, though they slept under one roof and passed in one corridor. Short, honest notes slid under her door in his own hand, and she read every last one of them and answered not a single one. "I told you at the window I had no name," one said, when I had known his name for a fortnight. "You put your body between me and a blade and ask me for one true thing, and I have lied to you, at least twice, for every true thing I have given you. I am trying to learn to stop. It is harder than I thought, for a man who was raised to wear a face." And another, later, "I keep circling the same word. I heard you, I have said sorry so many ways and none of them touch it. I did not only wrong you 3 years, Runa. I found the most private thing you owned, lying where you thought no one would ever see it, and I picked it up, and I kept it, and I let you give it to me again as though it were new. There is no soft word for that. I will not look for one. Her mother, before she rode north, found Runa at the south tower window, and stood with her a while. You are punishing him, Hala said, and he has earned it, and you are also making yourself as cold as they ever accused you of being, and that you have not earned. The bolt on your heart kept you alive at this court, daughter. It was a good bolt, but a bolt is only useful if you can also draw it back. A door that will not open is not a door, it is a wall. You know the name they had for you. Do not become it now, on purpose, in the one place it would finally be a lie. Runa said nothing, but she kept the letters. She did not answer them, but she kept them, in a drawer that had once held a writ, and some nights she took them out. Then, at the turning of the season, the letters stopped. She told herself she was glad of it. She told herself for 4 whole days that the silence was exactly what she had wanted, right up until the night Neris came into her chamber, gray-faced with the news that the king was not in his rooms, nor in the hall, nor anywhere within the walls, and that no one had seen him since the 10th bell. She was on her feet before her handmaid finished the sentence, and giving orders before she had decided to, and it was only when she reached the courtyard with her sword belt half buckled that she understood what her own hammering heart already knew, which was that she had stopped being able to imagine the world with him gone out of it a long time ago, and had simply been pretending otherwise to make a point. They had lost his trail at the east postern, the trackers told her, and a scent that ends clean at a gate ends that way for one of 2 reasons: because the man walked out of it, taking great care, or because someone carried him through it. His chambers gave up nothing. No horse gone from the stalls, no coin drawn from the counting hall, his sword still upright on its stand, his good cloak still on its peg, the room neat and cold and empty of him. Neris caught her hand and held it. The whole watch was awake and moving quiet. No bells, no cry raised, on Runa's own standing order, for a city that learns its king has vanished panics before dawn. And Runa stood in the courtyard, with the cold cutting straight through her half-buckled belt, and did the one thing she had sworn for 3 years she would never let herself do. She stopped bolting the door. She let the whole weight of it come, the terror and the fury and the love she had been calling by every name but its own, all of it at once, and instead of drowning her, it pointed like a compass needle, north and down and toward the river. She had spent 3 years hunting threats to him through dark halls by feel. It had never once occurred to her that she could hunt the man himself the same way. Grief, it turned out, was the finest tracker in Grey Cairn. It drew her down out of the upper ward, through the steep winds of the lower town where no lamp reached, along the river wall to a low tavern, throwing warm yellow light out into the murk. She came through its door fast and low, with her palm on her sword, braced for a bolted room, a knife, a body on the boards. There was no bolted room, there was no body. There was the King of Grey Cairn, poured along the far end of the bar with his collar undone and his hair a ruin, one hand loose around a cup, delivering some point of enormous importance and remarkable length to a barman who had clearly given up following it several rounds ago. Runa stood in the doorway with her heart still trying to climb out of her chest, and watched her husband gesture so broadly he nearly went off his stool. "Is that," said Neris, arriving breathless at her shoulder, "is that the king? Is he drunk?" He was catastrophically drunk. Relief reached Runa, first, a bright, scalding wave of it, since he was alive and whole and no hand but his own had brought him here. And hard on the heels of the relief came a fury so clean and total it nearly took her off her feet, because now that she knew he was safe she was going to kill him herself. She crossed the room until she was near enough to hear the wreckage he was making of the barman's evening. "The part you must grasp," Varric was explaining, with the dreadful earnestness of a man well past his sense. is that she is entirely within her rights to withhold forgiveness. That is the misery of it. I keep sitting down to feel hard done by, and I cannot get the feeling to come. I found the most private thing she owned lying, where she thought no eye would ever land, and I picked it up and carried it about, like a coin, in my pocket. What manner of man does that? A coward does that. I am, it turns out, a coward with a crown. So, you have said, the barman offered, with the resignation of the long-suffering. And then, to crown the cowardice, I stopped writing to her. She asked me for peace, you understand, and I finally found the decency to grant it. And do you know how a man grants a woman peace when every last part of him is baying to go and stand beneath her window and make a spectacular fool of himself instead? At some length, the barman agreed and shot Runa as she came up on his ruined patron's blind side, a look of such profound and silent gratitude that she nearly forgave him the whole evening. Did I mention, Varric was saying, that she can put 3 armed men on the ground with no blade and a ball gown in the dark, and then knock the poison out of my hand between the second man and the third because, of course, she smelled it. She smells everything. She is the most dangerous and most magnificent creature ever to be sold across a border for the sake of a treaty, and I have wasted 3 years of her. He paused, and his face did something complicated. 3 years. Who is given a thing like that and spends 3 years not looking at it? You, said the barman, with the honesty of a man past caring for his tip. Me, Varric agreed. Wretched. Runa reached past his shoulder and plucked the cup straight from his fingers. I was drinking that, Varric said, wounded, and then his gaze climbed up to her face and caught there, and would not come loose, and his whole ruined, sorry expression broke open into something so utterly undefended that it hurt to look straight at it. Runa, he said on a breath, as though her name were the only word he had left. What, she said, low and shaking with a dozen things at once. Were you thinking? No guard, no word. The whole city has been turning itself out for you. I was very careful, he said with wounded dignity and swayed. You are drunk in a river tavern, and the trackers thought you had been abducted. Well, he allowed, I was careful about the drinking. He listed toward her, and she caught him, all warm dead weight, and the ale and cedar smell of him, and he mumbled into her shoulder, You came, you felt it and you came. I did not think you would come. On your feet, she said, and got a shoulder under his arm and hauled the whole warm listing weight of him up off the stool, and he came willingly, gracelessly, leaning into her the way he had leaned into nothing in his careful guarded life, and mumbled into her hair that he had known she would come. The barman would vouch for it. Get up properly, she said, though she did not push him off. You know what your trouble is. He pulled back to peer at her with enormous solemnity. You would rather freeze at the edge of the room forever than risk being warm and wrong. I know that trouble. I invented that trouble. I wore a face for 30 years, so no one could get close enough to leave. And then a savage from the Rimlands sat down at my left hand and saw straight through it, and I have never been so seen in my life, and it terrified me, and I threw it in a drawer. He blinked at her, swaying. You are doing the drawer now. With me. Do not do the drawer. Runa, you, she said, are the very last man breathing who is permitted to lecture me on drawers. I know it. He beamed up at her, miserable and radiant at once. That is precisely why I am right about them. It takes one to know one. And then, listing hard and clutching the bar edge to keep himself upright, he said the thing he had plainly been howling to say beneath her window for an entire season. Stay married to me, I dare you. Not for the crown, nor the alliance, nor the sword arm. You lend the guard, for nothing of any use to anyone. Draw the bolt. Open the drawer. Choose me back on purpose this time. She stood caught between wringing his neck and keeping him off the floor, for he was sliding by slow degrees toward the sawdust, and the whole naked truth of him poured off him unguarded. No mask, no calculation. The man who had hidden every feeling he ever owned now hiding not one of them. It undid her more thoroughly than any speech he could have made, sober. "Ask me again," she said, low, "when you can stand upright without the assistance of the furniture." "And you will say yes to me," he informed her with the vast and tender certainty of the truly drunk. She opened her mouth to answer him, and the king of all grey cairn slid gently sideways and slid the last of the way down and went out cold against her shoulder, his ruined hair soft under her chin, the whole warm weight of him smelling powerfully of poor judgment and cheap wine. And Runa stood there in the yellow light of a river tavern, bearing up the entire weight of the man who had wronged her and wanted her and come apart without her, and found, to her considerable irritation, that she was smiling. For the first time since a season she could name to the hour. She bent and pressed her lips to his forehead. "Ask me tomorrow," she murmured into the hair of a man who would remember none of it, "and you shall find out." In the end, it took the King of Grey Cairn a very great deal of tomorrow. He asked her again the very next morning, grave-faced and mortified and cradling a cup of something bitter that Nerys had pressed on him with poorly hidden joy. And Runa listened to the whole halting sober speech of it and then told him, kindly, to ask her again tomorrow. He asked her the morning after that across the war table, doggedly, until 3 of the captains discovered a sudden fascination with the far wall, and the 4th had to leave the room. He asked her on the cold south tower stair, with the wind pouring off the hills, and in the guard-yard, where her own people pretended not to lean in to hear, and in the counting hall, where the tallies now balanced to the coin. He asked her clumsily, and once, unexpectedly, so well that she had to turn away and look hard at the weather. And once he sent up so many hothouse flowers that the guard-room reeked like a rich man's burial for the better part of a week, and Nerys threatened, in writing, to resign. And every single day Runa looked at him and told him to ask again tomorrow, not because she did not know her answer. She had known her answer in a river tavern, with his hair beneath her chin. She told him to wait because she had spent 3 years being counted worth nothing at this court. And she found that now the asking had finally come. She wanted to hear it 100 times over before she let him stop. Until one perfectly ordinary morning, over nothing at all, with the frost thick on the glass and no occasion to mark it, she looked across at the man grinning up at her with such hope, the king who had learned at terrible cost to be the man, and not the face, and she said yes. They were wed a second time at the turn of the year, and this wedding bore no resemblance to the first. The first had been a treaty with 2 people standing in it, cold and correct, a border sealed with a stranger's hand. This one, the whole city turned out for, because the whole city had by now heard some version of the tale. The grey traitor pulled down in the High Chief's own chamber, the savage foreign queen, who had been guarding the king in the dark for 3 years, while the court called her stone. And a city will always come out for a story like that. They lined the way and threw the last of the autumn flowers, and it was said afterward that the king wept during the vows which Runa had known he would, and that the queen did not, which was very nearly true. It was a nearer thing than she would ever admit, and something in her face gave her away regardless, and Varric, weeping, laughed at the sight of her fighting it, and after that she gave up minding who saw. But the moment she kept, the one that was truly theirs, came later and smaller, and with no crowd at all. There was no court gathered for it, no crier, no crowd. There was her word and his, and the south tower window standing open to the raw grey weather she had confessed, a lifetime ago, that she missed. Varric held her hand a long while after the saying of it, as though he did not altogether trust the world not to reach in and take it back. "You are bound to me now," he said. "There is no sending me north." "And why," said Runa, "would I send you north when I am the one who married you first? On paper, to close an alliance no one thought to ask whether I wanted. That match was my father's. This one is mine. I chose it. That makes you mine to keep, and mine to answer for, and mine, I am sorry to tell you, to argue with across a great many breakfasts. The best thing Varric said with feeling. That was ever done to me against my knowledge. And for once, God's keeper, she let it stand and did not argue. He never did break the habit of looking at her as though his own eyes owed her a debt they could not clear. She never once got him to concede aloud that the whole business of the bolted drawer had been his invention, long before it was hers. The court found other people to whisper about. Her mother, come the spring, said only that she had known, and looked insufferably pleased about it. And on the hardest nights, when the wind drove down off the rimlands and the old white scar on her forearm ached with the cold, Runa would wake to find her husband already awake beside her in the dark, saying nothing, keeping his own quiet watch at last over the woman who had kept his in secret for 3 long years, and she would let him keep it. It was, she had decided, no more than a fair division of the labor.